Hi everyone, this is Lao Wan reporting for 华尔街前线. Yesterday, Michigan held major presidential primaries for both parties. Here are the numbers. Donald Trump won 68% of the vote, and Nikki Haley won 26.5%, which means that of the 16 Republican delegates up for grabs, 12 will go to Trump and 4 will go to Haley. For Republicans, 39 more delegates will be decided in caucuses on Saturday, March 2nd. For the Democrats, who are competing for 117 delegates, Biden won 81% of the vote and 111 delegates. Marianne Williamson, the next candidate, won 3%, which falls below the 15% threshold to receive delegates. 13.2% voted uncommitted, a voting option used by many in protest of Biden's continued support for Israel in its campaign in Gaza. For viewers that aren't familiar with the system of delegates, it is the system for the two major parties to decide who to back as their presidential candidate. The Republican Party has 2,429 delegates who represent the outcomes of primary elections around the country. For a Republican candidate to win the party's nomination, they must win a simple majority of delegates. So that's 1,215 delegates. The Democratic Party has 4,765 delegates, which are similarly used to represent the proportion of primary voters that represent voters' support for a primary candidate. Biden, the leading Democratic candidate, needs to win a majority of these delegates to gain the Democratic nomination at the DNC, that's the Democratic National Convention. During the convention, the majority of these delegates are pledged to vote for a candidate based on the outcomes of the primaries. However, for Democrats, 714 of the delegates are free to vote however they choose. This is a graphic of how Michigan voted in the last 6 presidential elections. So Michigan will be a key state in the general election because it's fairly evenly divided between Republican and Democrat voters. In 2020, it voted for Biden, but in 2016, it voted for Trump. Michigan also works on a winner-take-all system for electoral college votes, which means that whichever candidate wins the majority of votes in Michigan in the general election, and by no matter how slim a margin, wins all 15 electoral college votes. What may be worrying for Biden in November is the possibility that the 13.2% of voters who voted uncommitted in Michigan in protest in the primary yesterday may not vote for him in the general election. The New York Times interviewed Palestinian-American Terry Ehuel, who has had a long history of working on Democratic campaigns. She said to New York Times reporters, "You want my vote? You cannot kill my people in my name. As simple as that." Michigan is home to the most Arab Americans in the U.S., with the highest concentration of Arab Americans living in the city of Dearborn in Wayne County. Dearborn is 54% of Arab American, and it is certainly not a coincidence that 16.8% of Wayne County voters in the Democratic primary voted uncommitted on the ballot. 4% of Republican voters in Wayne County voted uncommitted, and 3% of Republican voters statewide in Michigan voted uncommitted in the primary. This should all be worrying news to Joe Biden, who remains the most likely candidate to represent Democrats in the general election in November. Also cause for concern is that Donald Trump's favorability numbers are on a steady rise. According to 538, a website owned by ABC News that focuses on opinion poll analysis, Trump's favorability has risen from around 42.2% on January 1st, 2024 to 43.7% at time of recording. Joe Biden's approval rating has stayed roughly the same in that time, hovering around 39%. Some of the president's staunchest supporters have also begun to fear the possibility that he may lose to Trump. On February 16th, Ezra Klein, on his show for the New York Times, published a 25-minute audio article titled, "Democrats Have a Better Option Than Biden," calling for the president to pull out of the race and for the Democrats to hold an open convention where, if Biden drops out, Democratic delegates would be free to vote for whoever they want. Klein points to precedent where this was the norm between 1831 and 1968, pointing out that this was the case for the Republican Party's selection of Abraham Lincoln and the Democratic Party's selection of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. On February 21st, Klein published another audio article interviewing Elaine Kamarck. Elaine Kamarck has served as a Democratic superdelegate to the convention multiple times and is author of the book Primary Politics: Everything You Need to Know About How America Nominates Its Presidential Candidates. This interview was over an hour long, explaining in further detail what an open convention might look like. In the interview, they spent most of their time discussing the history of the convention process to select presidential candidates. A key takeaway from the interview with Kamarck was that while in many ways the current Democratic primary system of allocating pledged delegates at the Democratic convention is undemocratic, the system in place before, where delegates were free to pick their preferred candidate, was far more so. Kamarck and Klein discussed the possibility of a new open convention where delegates that had been picked with the conventional primary selection process were free to vote for another candidate, with the hope that primary voters would understand that it should be up for the delegates of the Democratic Party to decide. Kamarck says, quote, "I think that in an extraordinary circumstance, the people would understand that it's now gone to the parties." Although this discussion is interesting and an important work of political imagination, something we definitely need more of, it is unclear how practical and popular this solution is to Democrats' fears that Biden won't be able to defeat Trump in November. For now, polls predict Biden losing to Trump, and the Biden campaign seems ready to plow ahead even as key Democrat voices are expressing their concern. So I'll put it to you, the viewers. Are you interested in this talk about an open Democratic National Convention? Do you want a more in-depth video explaining the history of open convention processes, including the disastrous 1968 Democratic Convention that paved the way for Richard Nixon's presidency? Do you think that the Democrats' best chance against Trump is for Biden to step back and find a replacement? Or is all of this talk of Biden withdrawing wishful thinking? Please let me know in the comments. I'm excited to hear what you all think. This has been Lao Wan reporting for 华尔街前线. Thank you so much for watching, and if you haven't already, please like and subscribe.